Welcome, everyone, to Crew Call, an entire crew call dedicated to Vince Carter. And why not? Half man, half amazing, Vin-sanity, the dunk contest. We'll get to all of that. But first, when you think about the NBA and you think about players in the NBA, it is a players' league in the sense that when you have somebody like Vince Carter, you know that you're going to be on national TV in the U.S., you're going to be talked about in Canada, you're going to be worldwide. And Leo, that's what Vince Carter brought to the Raptors. Yeah,
I mean, it was unbelievable. Obviously, you know, we did a lot of college basketball, so we were well aware of Vince Carter in North Carolina, and, you know, he was a human highlight film there. And then when he came to the NBA, I'll be honest with you, I mean, you know, John Saunders and I were doing the games at the time, and it wasn't almost every game. We just look at each other going, nah, come on. He didn't just do that, did he? And it was a spectacular show every single time he stepped on the floor. And the early Vince Carter was a hungry Vince Carter. I mean, you got to understand, like, I hated the comparisons. I said this guy's got more talent than Michael Jordan. He could shoot it. He was taller. His bounce is even better, you know, and when he wanted to, you look at end of early games when he came to the Raptors, he could lock down people and make big defensive plays. I mean, he had the potential to be absolutely off the charts. And again, he was a hungry young player coming into the league looking to show that to everybody. So it really was a spectacle almost every night at the beginning of Vin-sanity.
Talent like that doesn't come around often, Jack.
No, it doesn't. And, it was my first year with the Raptors, and to watch Vince those first few years, literally, and even a Tracy McGrady, you look at these guys and you just say, you know, I'm looking at guys that have a chance to be Hall of Famers and have a chance to be really special. He was just night in, night out. It made it so much fun to go to the arena. And not only in Toronto, that was a lockout year, the first year, but he was a guy that the word was getting out in the NBA community. And as Leo mentioned, we all knew what he did at University of North Carolina for Dean Smith and company. And he was a guy that it was automatically tied into the Jordan comparison because of Carolina. And it was just, there was something special about him. You know, the it factor, when you watch a certain player, it jumps off the page. Vince Carter had it.
Yeah, Sherm, it's interesting from a player's perspective. You look at other players and you see what Vince does on a nightly basis. And he's the sort of player that all the other players are talking about based upon what he's doing out there in 94 feet, right?
Well, you think about it, other players were in awe of what Vince was doing when he was on these highlight reels and the things that he did against them. They were losing their mind. And, you know, this was a time in the NBA where the athleticism, I would say, wasn't at the peak. I mean, we're talking about a time where guys who were flyers like that really stood out. But Vince stood out amongst the flyers as one of the highest jumpers in the league. But not only that, I thought Vince's acrobatics athletically in game are what really separated him. He had the ability to do things and contort his body and finish at the rim over around people that was just phenomenal. And Matt, you mentioned this about him attracting attention, not only in the NBA, but worldwide. I was playing overseas when Vince got drafted, and we used to get NBA Access, that weekly show from the NBA, which would be a highlight reel show, and we'd have to be up at like 3 o'clock in the morning to see it, but, you know, we stayed up. But in any given week, and when Tracy got there as well, it ended up being anywhere from 2 to 5 of the top 10 highlights were Vince Carter and or Tracy McGrady. He was dominating the airways in terms of his excitement that he brought to the game. And there wasn't, you know, we saw a lot of dunkers come before him, but he had something special about him that when he attacked the rim, either you were there and you knew you were going to get posterized, or you bailed out of it because you didn't want to get posterized. He had that kind of impact.
All right, Eric Smith, bring us back to U.S. national television against the Suns, and he puts up 51 points.
I'll tell you right off the bat, from an absolutely selfish standpoint, as a young broadcaster, and Jack will correct me if I'm wrong, I think, Jack, you had a college game that day, and that was the first chance that I had to step into the broadcast outside of the pre-half and post and work the game alongside Chuck Swirsky. So to be sitting courtside calling that game, technically my first broadcast in my career, what a broadcast to have, to be calling that game. So first of all, thanks, Jack.
No problem.
But to have that seat to watch that unfold, and it ties into everything that everybody's touched on to this point. And even going back to our last episode where Leo talked about the Raptors having what the Grizzlies didn't. It was the fact that you had a Vince Carter who was international on highlights that Sherm's watching overseas. It's people now that are seeing him stateside that maybe haven't paid attention to the Toronto Raptors over the last few years, but suddenly now they're paying attention. They're seeing that Toronto jersey. They're seeing what this kid's all about, and they're now seeing it on the biggest broadcast possible. And for Vince in that moment to not obviously shy away from the moment or to be, confused by the moment or to cave under the pressure, to elevate his game to the way he did and to bust out with the 51, that just kind of set the tone, I think, for other things that were to come for him and ultimately for that team, not only that season, but in the years to come.
When NBA All-Star Weekend happens, it is a spectacle. Yeah. But there's one event that supersedes all others. Jonesy, you were there courtside. You interviewed him before he went out on the floor. Vince Carter in the 2000 dunk contest.
The thing that I remember about that weekend in San Francisco, aside from getting more rain than ever before, was interviewing Vince maybe 5 minutes before he walked up the tunnel at the place that the Raptors closed last year, Oracle Arena, and talking to him. And when the camera went off, I said to him, V, this is made for you. This is your thing. You're this. And he looked at me and he kind of nodded his head and he said, and it comes out later because he hadn't really practiced a lot of those dunks. Some of those, he was just making them up on the spot. So I reflect back now, and this comment resonates with me where he said, I don't know, Jonesy, I'm not so sure. And he walked up the tunnel ahead of me, and I thought, dude, you're going to kill this. I mean, this is made for you. And when he went out after the first dunk, that set the whole crowd on its ear. I was in the tunnel and kind of looking over people and around people to see what was going on. And I just thought, like everybody else, are you freaking kidding me? This guy's doing this. It's like, okay, well, what's coming next? That dunk contest was done after the first dunk where he did the reversed windmill 360 and the ball hit the ground before he did. That thing was done. And we're still talking about it 21 years later.
You look at that event, and then what came after that event was truly Vin-sanity. Because of the fact, and Leo, you can attest to this, having when we used to travel with the team, and getting in particularly into road cities, particularly late at night, maybe on a back-to-back or whatever the case may be, you'd fly in, you'd get into a hotel at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you just see the video in episodes 1 or 2 of The Last Dance, and the throngs of people outside a hotel waiting for the Chicago Bulls. After Vince Carter won that dunk contest, that's what it became. The rest of that season and beyond, it was insane. The amount of attention he not only brought to our travel party, but more importantly, what he brought to the Toronto Raptor logo, what he brought to the growth of sport in Canada. And, and we've all talked about the whole Carter effect and now what the NBA championship for the Raptors, what that effect's going to be years later. And you see Canada being number 2 in the world in terms of representation of NBA players. But I think that moment amplified it, took it to a whole nother level.
But about the dunk-off quickly, guys, remember after the dunk-off, to add to Vince Carter's lore, the Summer Olympics in Sydney, when Vince Carter jumped over Frederick Weiss, the 7-footer, That was on the
New
back of the
York Knicks.
All-Star. Yeah, that was on the back
First round.
of Vince Carter winning the dunk-off. So now we're looking at this, and now not only did the NBA see it, now the world sees this guy at the Olympics literally jump over a 7-footer and dunk the basketball. Toronto was completely on the map.
Leo, while the world, and understandably so, is fixated on Vin-sanity, there's a team assembled around him. And all of a sudden, this team is gelling. They have the right pieces. And ultimately, Leo, they make their first playoff appearance while all this is just really starting to sizzle.
Go back to what the Raptors did. And we talk about building something good. When you build, you need your young stars, right? You need your new guys coming in. You need your seasoned veterans that can help guide them. And you need your guys maybe on the way out, right? And the Raptors did that. They put that together. You had, Antonio Davis. You had guys like that. You had when you have Tracy and Vince, you got an Alvin Williams who was a great Raptor for his time. You start looking at all the players on that team, and it was a great mix of talent, experience. The chemistry was there. I think these guys enjoyed playing with each other. They had not only did they have the athleticism, but they had the physicality, and you needed it in that game at that time of the NBA. You had to be physical. You had to be able to compete, and the Raptors had those guys to do that. So you're really looking at a very unique time in Raptor history where all of a sudden, boom, hey, here's Toronto. Here's Vince Carter, slam dunk. And now you're a playoff team. So it was a great coming together of a lot of different factors.
Sure, take us back, because here they are. They're making their first playoff. And then, of course, that grows into 2001 and that Sixer Raptor series, which is still talked about to this day.
Yeah, and we're talking about a young Allen Iverson and Vince Carter going at it. And it was special when you think about the performances by each star. I mean, both with 50-plus games, but also, Vince Carter was the guy at that point that started to gain some traction and conversation about, is Vince does he want to be that great player, or does he want to be considered this athlete? And a lot of comparisons were made back then to guys like Kobe Bryant and can he be that guy and all those kind of things. But the reality for Vince was that he busted onto the stage because of his athleticism. And then you started to see him at some point not necessarily want to just be considered an athlete. He wanted to be considered a basketball player. And I really thought in that series against Philly, he put it all out there. He was excellent. Vince did a great job. And I know there's a lot of controversy about him going back to his graduation and flying to the game and all of that. But at the end of the day, I do not begrudge him for doing that. He missed a shot that we've seen him make many times. He missed a shot. That happens. To put it on anything other than him missing a shot doesn't make any sense. But again, the franchise is moving in the right direction. They're a playoff team. They're a team that's getting better. They're a team that has what was considered a star at that point to build around. So I think that the aspirations of the city and the team and the franchise were very high, considering that they had this guy who had set the world on fire, and they had him in terms of him wanting to play for their franchise.
Every player can live with the make, but can you live with the miss, right? Everybody envisions making that shot that Vince took, but can you take that shot and ultimately live with it? And as many people think that they can, a lot can, and he certainly did, right? I mean, he stood out there and said, all right, give me the ball, let me do my thing. Leading up to that, there was a shot as well. When you think about the impact that Alvin Williams has had on this franchise in that series against Eric, the New York Knicks, leading into that second round in the matchup against Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I think we all, every time we go to MSG, you look at that spot on the floor where Alvin Williams hit the shot. And I know that we all have recounted that over the years. And if I'm not mistaken as well, and I'm trying to remember now if it was in that Knicks series that year, or if it was the year before. I believe it might have been the year before, where there was a late game situation and Vince passes to D Brown for a shot at the end of the game for a potential game-winning shot. So here we are. Now we flip over to the Philly series. To your point, Matt, did he learn from that? I'm the man. I've got to be in the moment. I can't give it up. I can't be passing off to D. Brown or anybody else. This is my team. I'm the star. I've got to take the shot. And that shot that he misses at the buzzer didn't miss by a whole lot. And I know for years and Jonesy and I have talked about this a lot, I know on radio broadcasts, where to play that woulda, coulda, shoulda game, that shot goes down. Most people believe the Raptors are beating the Milwaukee Bucks. And I specifically remember Kobe Bryant being quoted in, I believe, Slam Magazine saying, we would have been playing the Raptors that year in the finals, not Philly. It would have been the Toronto Raptors. And furthermore, if Tracy McGrady stays in Toronto, we're playing the Raptors in the finals, Lakers-Raptors, for a number of years to come. And you just think of that one little moment in time, again, woulda, coulda, shoulda, had that shot fallen, how things might have changed.
You know, Jonesy, take us through now this time, right? And Eric mentions it. You have T-Mac leaving. You have that shot that doesn't go in against Philadelphia. And then we fast forward to the 2002 postseason without Vince.
It was a source of discontent amongst the fans all year because of the knee injury and the quad tendon. And, you know, he missed games and people were upset that he wasn't playing games, but yet they would see him out at a concert or something like that. And people were all upset about those things. But, Matt, they made a run at the end of that season without Vince where it looked like they were dead in the water in terms of the playoffs. And all of a sudden they start to win, and they win like 6, 7, 8 in a row. And they get into the playoffs. And now Jack, Leo, you guys remember this. Awareness is heightened. Here are the Raptors again, showing that they're a good team even without Vince. And again, as Eric said, play the woulda, shoulda, coulda. If Chris Childs knows what the score is in the game, at the end of Game 5, they actually have a chance to win that series against Detroit, Jacko.
Jonesy, you mentioned that team making that great run. Antonio Davis was brilliant in that trade. And when you look at the three best trades in Raptor history, obviously Antoine Jameson, Vince Carter, Kawhi Leonard, DeMar DeRozan, and then the other trade would be Jonathan Bender on draft night for Antonio Davis. Antonio Davis was brilliant in his small stretch with the Raptors. Obviously played 2 different stints with the Raptors, but that first stint, he was amazing. And during that run against Detroit in 2002, I mean, he was the guy, just get on my back. He was unbelievable.
Here comes the hard part of the Vince conversation, right? Jack talks about it so often, about the climb, right? The innocent climb, and everything is great. Yes, Tracy leaves, and, you know, all of a sudden there's an undertone of certain things that people like and don't like, and a lot's going on within the organization. And all of a sudden, it's apparent that a breakup, unfortunately, is going to happen. And it ultimately does, Leo.
Well, I think what, you know, a lot of people don't talk about, there were a lot of forces pulling players away from Toronto, a lot of negative forces. And this had been going on really with the departure of Isaiah Thomas and on. And that was an issue. And if you talk to a lot of players subsequently that had left Toronto, a lot of them look back and say, you know what, I don't really know if that was the right thing to do, even going back as far as Damon Stoudemire. But when you think about what happened, obviously there's 2 sides to every story. And, you know, I think MLSE and Vince Carter both have a share in this. And unfortunately, there were so many things said that it really became a real negative. And the Raptors, it took a while to climb out of that again, because all those negative forces that have been kind of pulling players away and trying to take them away in the earlier years now had ammunition. Now they were coming in full force. So I think, you know, whatever, all these things that happened with Vince really was a really difficult period for the Toronto Raptors to overcome. And also, you know, in moving Vince Carter, I mean, they got hammered on that too. I mean, it's not like they came out of it, okay, we moved this, you know, superior talent, look what we got. No, it wasn't like that. So this was a tough pill to swallow, and I think a lot of lessons were learned throughout this whole process.
I would just like to say one thing. I would argue, we lived through Tracy leaving and Vince leaving and even a Chris Bosh leaving. And I look at what we have now in terms of the management leadership group, ownership, leadership with Masai Ujiri and his staff, coaching, Dwayne Casey, now Nick Nurse and their staffs. I think what's in place now in Toronto, if that was in place back then, I think Raptor history would have been rewritten dramatically. But it's all part of being a starter company, right? And that's what the Raptors were. And mistakes are made and learning through it and the trial and error. And Leo, I agree with you. There was an undercurrent of people that didn't want it to succeed. And there was a lot of undercurrent that, hey, you're better off playing in the U.S. And in a lot of ways, the Raptors and MLSE or whatever you want to call it didn't have a lot of really good things in place at that point to not only recruit players, but more importantly, retain players.
This whole idea of not coming to Toronto went all the way back to the Damon Stoudemire trade when Kenny Anderson refused to come to Toronto in that deal. So this was something, as you guys mentioned, that was under the current, a conversation that was happening across the NBA. And Kenny Anderson was definitely one of those people that kind of put it at the forefront that players didn't want to come to Toronto. And then also you think about the situation and Rob Babcock having to deal with that Vince Carter trade. That's difficult. That's a situation where what are you going to do when a disgruntled player wants to leave? And you're coming in, and he was basically there for 1 year to deal with that case. The trade value wasn't there. So now as an organization, you have to reset and figure out a way to try and get quality players back to the organization and potentially a star. And I think moving forward in the Brian Colangelo era, then we saw different moves being made to try and gain credibility for the franchise. But I agree, the organization as it's set right now, if this group had to deal with that situation, I think it would have been a totally different outcome. We saw what Masai Ujiri did with a disgruntled Carmelo Anthony. I think Masai Ujiri and his staff would have had a better handle on how to deal with that situation.
This now leads us to Chris Bosh, but we are out of time. And so that means that we're going to have another crew call.
Way to tease the next episode, Maddie. Way to tease the next episode. Way to go. Can we all come together and say thank you to everyone who are doing their part, and for everybody out on the front lines, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. This is Crew Call. So much to talk about.